Welcome, everybody. My name is Abe Christ from the Performance Office. It's good to see a bunch of you out this afternoon attending the Sensible Assessment Series, analyzing interim results. I know this is not the greatest time of year to do this type of stuff, but here we are. Let's enjoy the next hour or so. I'm sorry we don't have a handy-dandy quiz like we have for the last few of our sessions. We're all in serious mode here in the office, trying to finish strong with our testing window. We have 2 more days left in we are trying to finish strong. So again, welcome to our Sensible Assessment series. My name is Abe Christ. This has been a monthly community of practice to share ideas about implementing sensible and balanced assessment systems. And this community of practice is designed to foster a deeper understanding of the variety of assessments and tools made available to districts through CSDE's statewide sensible assessment system. So the assessments are not only used for their intended purposes, or they are used for their intended purposes and not for any redundant purposes. In this meeting, we will be joined by district partners. So thank you very much to share some of their practices around the sensible use of interim assessment results. Thank you so much for all our district partners for making it out today. Also to my many colleagues on the webinar, and also for all the attendees that are here this afternoon. Okay, couple meeting reminders. First of all, the link to the slide deck is in the chat, or one of my colleagues will probably drop it in if it hasn't already been done yet. I see it, Christy, thank you. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our training page. If one of your colleagues misses it, attendees are on mute. We are monitoring the chat and will respond to anything. If we don't get to it, you can certainly email us at this email address. And then we will stop several points during the presentation to take questions where you can raise your hand and ask them verbally. So again, today's meeting purpose is really to look at overview some of the ways that Smarter Balanced and NGSS interim assessment results can be analyzed using the CRS. Educators will share their experiences and provide some tips as it relates to that. So who are our guests today? We have guests from 4 districts, so we will move pretty quickly today because each will have a few words to say, 10 to 15 minutes. First off is from West Hartford, Eileen Eustace. From Thompson, Laura Stefanski, and Patty Chanel. And then from our CTEX, Brian Barrington, and from East Hartford, Ellen Delgado. So thank you to all of you again for making it out today. After our district share, we will have some summary of our resources and a wrap up quickly, but the bulk of the presentation is from West Hartford, Thompson, our CTEX, and East Hartford. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. I know first up is West Hartford, and Eileen, I'm going to pass the baton to you and you can get us started.
Okay, thanks everybody. My name is Eileen Eustace and I serve as the Director of Secondary Education in West Hartford. So I work primarily with the middle schools and the high schools. And I apologize, I wish I had a department supervisor or building principal available today, but everybody is tied up with professional development this afternoon. So I'm here to share a little bit of information related to our early use of NGSS interims. So I believe I did submit a slide, so I'm hoping it might be next. Thank you. So I really just have a very, just a few points in terms of sharing practice for today. So what I wanted to share is that we had the opportunity to bring in a science department supervisor right at the beginning of the year. And fortunately, it was someone with some great experience. Her name's Allison Lucas. And when she came in, one of the things that through classroom observations, conversations with teachers, she really noted that they really needed some opportunity to learn more about NGSS in terms of grounding their work in the standards, as well as being exposed to the variety of resources available, including the interims and the other resources. So she really had to take a little bit of a step back and work with the departments at the middle level as well as the high school, to give them some of the basic information. While teachers had the basics, I think she may have thought they would have been further along. So one of the areas in which she started was introducing them to the interim assessment. So that we had a handful of teachers that had been using them, but it was not a consistent and widespread practice across our schools. So during one of our professional learning sessions, she introduced them. Again, she got everybody into the platform and really kind of trained them on how to give the interim assessments. And once she was able to walk them through that, what she did is she broke them down either into grade levels at the middle school or course content areas at the high school. And she had them take a look at the various assessments that were available and allowed the teachers to choose as a course group or as a grade level 2 interim assessments to be given by the end of this year. Or in grade 8 and 11 to give 2 interim assessments to students by the time before the students were going to be tested. So I think there's something to be said about giving teachers some initial ownership in terms of choosing which interim assessments that align with the content that's delivered at the grade level or within the course, that really helped in terms of getting some buy-in. So again, my second bullet there really had to do with training the teachers and how to administer them and how to then access the scores in the centralized reporting system. So really what we found is that there really hadn't been a lot of formal training and opportunity for teachers to dig into this. So I think that that was really also an important piece, is having the teachers. I mean, we make the assumption that maybe they know how to go into this or they've read about this in some of the materials that have been pushed out. But I think her practice of planning some professional learning around this was really important in terms of accessing the scores in the centralized reporting system. In addition, what she did is she provided links to a variety of resources, such as something as basic as the quick guide to the interims, right? It's really not an incredibly huge document. So it was that serves as a great tool, because she also wants teachers to independently be able to access information or have that information at the ready, given the fact that she does go across 5 schools. She also, another example is she gave them the scoring assertions so that they could work to align the assessments with the content that was being delivered. So for this year, based on that, the teachers were with the interim assessments. The teachers really they analyzed the data more individually. Or if they had an opportunity to meet as a content group, they did discuss the scores and how students did as in those smaller groups. But again, the next layer of work that Allison's been talking about is, as we begin to really move forward work in terms of professional learning communities and data analysis, the interims are really going to play a much bigger role. We are also in the process of doing some curriculum revision, which involves, we made some adjustments to our template that involves greater emphasis on identifying assessment, common formative assessments and common summative assessments. And so what we're looking to do is to actually build some of the interim assessments into all of our curriculum documents, where it makes the most sense and aligns well with the content. So the big, and again, the big thing is, so students do this and they have this experience, but the idea too is then so what about the data, right? So one of the areas of focus for next year within those course groups and grade level groups is to then analyze the interim assessment data collectively, and then be able to have that serve to inform instructional practices, and also note if there's any revisions that need to be worked into our curriculum. So one example was, we did have a teacher that did some analysis based on the interim assessments, as well as the overall scores from the previous year, and identified an area of growth and was able to build a mini unit, and then also use an interim assessment, at the end of that mini unit to assess how students were doing. And believe it or not, as the scores are coming in, for NGSS, we actually noted that was actually a very specific area that we were able to grow. And I think just that particular example, and Allison having the opportunity to share that example to show the connection between by looking at the data, by providing opportunities just with the interim assessment, and looking at student progress, not only does it help better inform our curriculum, but it also will help our students perform, perform better on the NGSS. So that was, again, we are really, I would say, in the beginning stages. I'm sure if you opened up West Hartford, it looks like we've administered, and we have administered a lot of interim assessments, but I will say it's pockets. And it is something that we really want to leverage, because I do believe we have a lot of power in that, and working in groups in terms of analyzing the data for the interim assessments. The other thing that they use the interim assessments for, particularly as they get into the later grades, so in grade 11, they may actually choose some of the interim assessments that relate to life science, because students would have taken biology the previous year. So they do actually use an opportunity to sort of pre and post test, like how well do they remember this information? What do we need to do a quick review of and shore up? And just even reviewing the interim assessment with students provides a great scaffold and review. So that's, again, like I said, we're really at the beginning stages. I know you're going to hear from some districts that are definitely much further along, but hopefully that helps for any districts that are really just getting started with using the interim assessments.
Thanks, Eileen. Any questions? I don't know if I saw anything in the chat, or anybody, if you want to raise your hand, you can certainly ask a question.
There's nothing in the chat at this point, Abe, but we can always also come back well, I know, Eileen, you're going to jump off earlier. So if people have questions for West Hartford, Eileen has another commitment after this. So if you have a question specifically for her, you would want to ask it sooner rather than later.
I'll put my email in the chat. So if someone has a question later and they'd like to reach out to me, don't hesitate to send me an email. So I'll put my email in the chat.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Eileen. All right. Well, thank you for sharing, Eileen. We appreciate it. We'll move on to Thompson. I did want to mention a couple things just to orient you to the agenda, because I didn't mention this earlier. We're toggling between science and smarter. So Eileen led us off with science. Thompson's going to touch on smarter. Then we're going back. Brian will touch on science, and then we'll finish strong with Ellen and smarter. So I just wanted to mention you to that. One other bonus material too, for those, since we are talking results, that has nothing to do with the interims, but since this has been a hot topic this week, our summative assessment results are actually available right now in the rolling release on the CRS. So if you are, sometimes things don't trickle down from the stuff that we correspond out to our DAs. And if you are interested in our summative assessment results, you can actually go scoop them up right now for science. And then for smarter, they take a little bit longer for the ELA side, but for math and our alternates, it's instant. Anyways, sorry to digress on another topic. So Laura and Pat, you out there? I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Yes, we're out here.
All right. I hope so. Thank you.
I'm Laura Stefanski, and this is Patty Chenille. And we are curriculum leaders. I do English language arts, and she does mathematics. Okay.
I know. There we
okay.
Go. We're ready to roll.
All right.
First slide. We're ready for the next one.
Yeah, click. Okay. So what kind of led us down this path of getting, into the interims is we did a lot of work on assessment in our district, and we had been using the NEWA for a lot of years and IXL with the hopes that these would help us, help our teachers drive instruction. And we really just felt as though it wasn't working and it was very expensive. And so doing a lot of research and looking for some other alternatives, it kind of led us to getting a little bit of support from the CSDE. We were able to meet with Jen Michalek. Patty had a lot of contact with her, and I was able to speak with Joanne White, and they kind of, suggested that we kind of take a look at interims and get into them a little bit more. And that's kind of, how we are here with you today. If you can click to the next slide, please.
We're ready for the, yeah, we go.
Yeah.
Oh, not that one. Go
Yeah.
back one.
Okay.
Sorry. So as Laura said, we were looking for something, primarily, we needed something to help us drive instruction. We needed something that was going to be meaningful and something that was going to be easy for our teachers to take ownership of. And we all know that we all have, you know, the higher stakes accountability at the end of the year, and it made perfect sense to take a deep dive into the interims. It's actually also free and very useful. It helped to provide us with the data that we needed to make better instruction and make better decisions around our instruction. It's instead of using one assessment that tested for everything and having our various content teachers trying to dig through and find the pieces, using the interims allowed us to have focused chunks and to determine what it was that our students knew and what they didn't know so that we could make better decisions. And of course, you know, the performance on those interims would be a very good indicator or predictor of how they would do on the summative assessment at the end of the year. And finally, and probably really importantly, especially for our early learners, our elementary kids, you know, the first time they start taking the Smarter Balances in 3rd grade, and without an opportunity to gain familiarity with the tools and the types of questions that they're going to encounter on the summative, you know, we felt that they would not be doing as well. So having the interims introduced that early on would give us a leg up as well.
So how we use them in the district, actually, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start first. Okay. So from a math perspective, we want to, is this where we want to talk about like when? Okay. Okay. So they were used in a variety of different ways. The first way was as a pre and post assessment. So for example, my 8th grade math colleagues were doing a unit on functions, and they chose the focused interim assessment block on functions and gave that as a pretest to see what the kids knew and what they didn't know, and truly used it to guide their instruction. At the end of several weeks of instruction, provided that same interim block to see how the children did, and the gain was tremendous. It made the teacher feel so accomplished in knowing that, you know, using this tool was the right thing to do because it definitely guided what she needed to do with those kids.
Yeah. In ELA, it's a little bit different. We use not just the focused ones, but the regular IABs. And for ELA, a lot of times, I think it feels in our conversations very different than math, because you have something like read literary texts, and it really gives you a bunch of different pieces of information. And, you know, a particular test in English language arts, you could potentially give, and it could fit into your curriculum at any time of the year, you know, for a lot of them. So it's kind of hard to piece them together. But as soon as we started, the teachers started to really dig in and pick a few and administer them. Like our 5th grade did a particular unit, and they gave the read literary texts IAB, and they were able to identify after analyzing it that the students struggled with, you know, inference questions of all types, but especially finding supporting details for the selected inferences. And then because this was a skill that was kind of ongoing for them throughout the year, they were able to kind of plan a little bit differently, you know, make different groups for themselves and really differentiate a little bit better with the results.
Our second use especially in our lower grades, they use these the interims as well as the performance task sample items as whole class instruction, putting the kids into groups and showing them how to break down those challenging questions. Oh, that's the other one. So yeah, as a whole group instruction and dealing with a large task.
Yeah, and in ELA, you know, a particular teacher responded that it gave her a lot of information about the idea of the way that they use the words in the testing, like this idea of infer, and how, you know, it's sometimes they say infer, sometimes they say inferencing, sometimes they say inference. And in 5th grade, the way that the kids understood that in one form was different in another form. And being able to kind of like take some of those questions and use that as a class activity, help them to understand that. So I think that was really valuable.
The final piece is once they have been administered, and we started getting into analyzing, they were able to go in and look at the 5 lowest performing questions, and specifically could look at the question and how every single child answered that question, looking for some common misconceptions. One of the great eye-opening things was, in 5th grade, they were doing operations with whole numbers and decimals, and they found that the multiplication was not the problem, it was the placing of the decimal point. So that helped them to be able to go and clear up those misconceptions, provide some additional instruction, and even some remediation if necessary.
Yeah. Some of the ELA teachers, not surprisingly at all, were able to identify that anytime there was a question that had like multiple steps or several answers, that was particularly challenging. Depending on the grades, like some of the younger grades thought it was just exposure to those types. And then in the 7th and 8th grade, the teachers felt like the kids saw, longer text, multiple responses that they had to choose, and they would either quickly choose one and move on, and not put a lot of time and attention to it. So trying to identify trends like that and come up with ideas on how they could, help the kids be more successful in this type of thing.
Moving on.
Yeah.
All right. So how we kind of rolled this out, we got started a little bit later. So Ellen talked about them starting very early in the year. We actually didn't get started until January. We introduced first in December prior to Christmas break. We introduced at a faculty meeting the how and why of interims and why we were going to go down this path. In January, we had Jen Michelik from the State Department come in and provide a half-day PD to all of our staff. And how do you, it wasn't so much the how you administer, but how do you actually retrieve the data and actually taking them through, because they had administered, prior to that January PD, they had administered their first interim. And so the purpose of that PD was to get them in there and teach them how do you actually go in, find the data, how do you go about looking at each individual child, and the deep dive into the data, so that they could then create next steps. Where were they going to go with that information? We did that again later in January when they got to a new unit. They administered another interim, and we chose that time because we had professional development time coming in February, and we wanted that time to be for the teachers to dive into the data from this interim.
Yeah. So, and then we realized state and other support. We did a lot of research, got a lot of support for how we were going to roll this out. Found like people in different grade levels that were interested that we could kind of pull in to kind of keep other teachers motivated. And we have currently been looking at embedding it in the curriculum, and there are pockets of documents that we have that done, and that's something that we're planning on working on for next year. And then we really just, again, the idea of creating this plan, like having structures for sustainability. How are we going to support teachers? How are we going to make this a thing in our district, and make sure that it was going to be successful, and we were going to follow it through. So you can see from our little checklist, we are in process in Thompson. We have embedded it in certain areas. We're actively providing time to our teachers, and have a lot of administrative support. We are for next year looking at more of this, looking at the SBAC data review and making connections to our interims, and really rolling out the tools for teachers more, which is a great tool for
the connections playlist
and stuff like that. Yep. So finally, our last slide, just want to touch on some of the things that we learned from administering interims this year. Really, you have to have a solid plan if you want this to be successful.
The second option may or may not be meaningful to all of you out there, but for us, it's how do you want to analyze the data? Do you want to analyze it by a particular classroom? Do you want to analyze it by a grade level? We learned that, you know, we were a pretty small district, and for us, being able to analyze on a full grade level was also helping us to evaluate our curriculum. So when you are setting up the administration of your interim, being sure that all your teachers that are using the same interim select the same test reason will ensure that when you go to retrieve your data, that it's all lumped together. So it will be grouped by the test reason.
Yeah, and we learned that just because a few teachers, we were like, why is theirs independent? Why isn't it all together like all the others? And, you know, it shows you the numbers of kids that took it. And that's kind of what we figured out. And they have like a drop down menu of test reasons, and they're very, you know, like test reason 1, summative, test reason 2, like they just have a bunch of random that can be used anytime. But if any teachers chose a different reason, it separated all of that out. It grouped it out.
And then the final thing is making sure, if you've worked so hard to create a plan and to make sure that your data is going to be grouped meaningfully, please make sure that you also allocate time. It takes time to go in and to analyze that data and to make it meaningful, to truly drive instruction, which is what that was our whole purpose in getting into this, was to drive instruction. So final slide just provides our contact information, and if anyone has any questions, we're always happy to answer.
Okay, thanks, Laura and Pat. We appreciate it. I know Ellen chimed in with the test, thumbs up for the test reasons as being very helpful. So you got to vote for that. Are there any questions from anybody in attendance?
So far, nothing in the chat.
I have one question, actually. So you mentioned that you have to have the same type of question assigned, so when you pull the data, it all collects the same. So we've run into some schools where we'll have a teacher give the same assessment to all students. They log in, they take the same assessment, and then when you pull the data, it breaks it out into smaller chunks. Have you run into that issue in the past?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why that test reason is really important. So, you know, if I have 4 teachers that are all teaching, that are all going to administer the same interim, you know, we meet beforehand and we say, okay, we're going to use, you know, fall 2023 as our test reason.
Yeah, it's a drop down menu. It's different than the title. It'll have you put a title, and then it'll say like, what's your test reason? And it's a drop down menu. And if all of the teachers giving the same one don't choose the same thing, it'll separate the scores out by class.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it would have been helpful for us to know that the first time we did it. So that's why
we did figure it out on our own, which we were very proud of.
Yes.
And I don't know if this helps at all, Brian, but the test reasons can be changed afterward. So if you want to group what you've already done to review. Okay, I'm sorry. You can go in and change your test reason. I'll send you an email how to do that. If you remind me, put a little note and I will send you a way to change it. You can change your test reason afterward so that you can correlate all of your information. And then if you sort everything out, instead of looking at the little bits, what we did, it's not quite as visually pretty, but I would download everything into an Excel spreadsheet, and then that allows me to really, you know, remove information I don't want, or sort by certain scores or levels, or that is another way, so that even if I can't add groups together in the system. So if you had 130 students that took it at the same time with the same test session, and then 10 students that took it at a separate time, that would not, you can't mix those two. I did try and get that to happen, but that was not going to happen. But yes, we could do that. So that's something I can send information on. Right.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds like a new PD session for our teachers. They'll be happy.
All right, well,
Oh,
when
I
you
see.
changed it,
Test name, I just lost that question. Hang on. When you change the test name after you give the test, is that by teacher or all? You can do it. It has to be by individual test. I'm gonna go in and play with it for a minute and make sure. And then I will put a little how to in our at the end of this.
all right, thanks, Christy. And thanks again, Pat and Laura, for sharing from Thompson. We're going to toggle back to science now. I think Brian had actually asked that question, so I think Brian is still here. We're going to toggle back to science. And Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the Connecticut Technical Education and Career System when it comes to the science interims?
Absolutely. Just as a note before I get started, it's very similar to what West Hartford is for, like, we're in the same boat. So we're using the NGSS interim assessments across the board. Just if you're not familiar with E-Tex, we have 17 different high schools. It's being implemented in grades 9 through 11 across the district. So there has been training so far where teachers have been trained on how to access the interims, how to get students to log in and run the sessions. So there's some comfortability there. But we noticed that they're just being done as a task in the past, and we wanted to get away from that. So again, the so what, how can we make this more meaningful, both for students, for ourselves with the data? So one of the first things we did was pull data on the interim assessments across the district and notice that schools that had higher utilization had higher test scores. So we just noticed over 3 years that our test scores went up with an increased use of the IVs or the interim assessments. All right. So some of the different ways that the interim assessments are being used, first with our gradual release model. So over 3 years, we start with more direction with students. We walk them through the platform. We'll walk them through the tools that are available to them so they get comfortable as they practice the assessments over time. That will be with a lot of teacher support. They'll do them in groups. There's worksheets that are being provided on how to access the different materials with checkpoints. So there's a lot of structure to start. And then moving away towards junior year, it's more student independent work. They're practicing these on their own. We're looking at the data and the relationship between the data and student success. So since we're a technical school system, our schedule is split into trades and academics. So for science, we only have 90 days of science. For academics, the other 90 days students are in shop. So there's varied use, especially with 9th and 10th grade, on the amount of assessments that are given. But across the board, it seems like they're done at least once per quarter. There are pockets of teachers and schools that are using them more heavily. So we're also, let's see. Yep, and again, I already went over test taking strategies, providing tools. So we're really just trying to make sure that students are comfortable with the platform. So when it comes time to test day over time, they'll know how to access, how the questions are designed. And then teachers are also teaching with multiple strategies on how to solve some of these problems. Let's see. Okay, I have 2 teachers that actually are practicing what this slide says, so I'm going to give them an opportunity to share as well.
Hi. If you can go to the next slide.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you. So our teachers were surveyed recently for our curriculum development needs about how they were using the interim assessments, and this is real feedback that teachers gave. What we noticed around the district was a lot with 9th graders. It was very guided, where you would do the question as a group, learn all the tools, the comfortability with using it, even though they've used it in 8th grade. With the 8th grade assessment, having a refresher, making sure everyone's on the same page in 9th grade, and starting to build up their confidence with what the questions at the high school level look like.
And we do that in 9th grade as well, because being a tech school, we actually get many different schools that will pretty much feed into our school. So for example, being a school located in New Britain doesn't mean you only have New Britain students, but you'll have students from Bristol, from Hartford, from Newington, from Berlin. So we try to just get everybody on the same page in that 9th grade.
And then when students progress to 10th grade, we tend to look at more content specific questions. We do try and choose to teach within content specific context when we choose interims in 9th grade, but in 10th grade, as that gradual release of responsibility from a whole class setting to maybe a small group trying to answer it, to students practicing them on their own, is very content specific when it comes to 10th grade, which is usually our biology coursing.
By 11th grade, we're ideally working on those harder questions. It can start as a class, but then again, working down to the individual level. And we also increase the amount of times that students are exposed to the interim. So while 9th and 10th grade might only be once per quarter, by 11th grade, they're doing at least once per cycle.
And in our feedback from teachers, they are consistently using it, and they're at the point where we're starting to look at the data and see how that could potentially inform instruction.
And
So then, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I think the next slide is the.
Let's see. There it goes. So now that we have our interims being assessed regularly across all schools, we're trying to look at consistency with how they're being administered along with what we're doing with the data. So we are a Marzano school district. We're focusing on developing a PLC process and framework that would, for science, embed the IABs. So then there's artifacts of student work along with IEB scores, so we can look at multiple points of data to look at students' ability to navigate the questions, to use the skills that are taught along with the different standards. So we have PLCs. We're looking at aligning with our curriculum so that, again, there's consistent use. So each quarter, what is the understanding for each teacher on how often they'll give the assessment and which ones will be given? So then we could compare data from school to school and look at it more holistically as a district. Continue training. So we're going to, along with what was mentioned earlier with the categories or the test reason, but just continue training, one on the platform itself, but also strategies and teaching models that support the interim assessments and the skills that are aligned. And then, so we do have a one pager on how to navigate, but again, it's just going to be continued updating and providing of resources to make sure that teachers are comfortable pulling the data within their own schools, so then they can make it meaningful for their PLCs.
Okay, thanks, Brian, and Brian's colleague. We appreciate you guys sharing as well. Any questions for the team from the Connecticut Technical Education and Career System? Okay. We are going to move on to, I think Ellen is here from East. Yeah, I see Ellen here from East Hartford. Ellen, we're gonna toggle back to Smarter. We're keeping you guys on your toes here, moving back and forth. We're gonna go back to Smarter, and I'm gonna hand the baton over to Ellen in East Hartford.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the curriculum and assessment supervisor for elementary, pre-K through 5. So a lot of this is focused on our 3 through 5 Smarter Balanced tests. I focus mainly on ELA. I have a partner that focuses on math, but this system is really kind of all inclusive of 3 through 5 and how we use IABs, FIABs, and the Centralized Reporting System. So looking at this is kind of our overview of how we use IABs and FIABs within the district. We have test-like scenarios, guided practice, and instructional integration. And you see the little Centralized Reporting System icon underneath the test-like scenario. That's where that platform and integration is so powerful and helpful for us when we use the test-like scenarios for our students, that we're able to analyze the data, use some predictability with whether we're using it as a unit assessment, a curriculum-based assessment, or a standalone IAB, such as the speaking and listening one or the vocabulary one that tends to be very challenging for our students. So we're able to examine the data, but we do this comprehensive approach across ELA, math, and science in these 3 types of usage for the IABs. And this kind of gives you 2, I think there might be one preview. Nope, this is good. So these are the 2 main tools that kind of inform our process. The image on the first image, that's our district IAB and FIAB implementation plan. So the first page is ELA, the second page is math, and you see the color coding of the test type, the guided practice, and then the integrated and instruction. We rely heavily also on tools for teachers, pieces and lessons and guidance to enhance our instruction. So we have, you can see the list there that shows how many IABs and FIABs students interact with across the school year. So that's our main district organizing document. And then a couple key pieces that we use from the CSDE. When you go into the website, you go into resources, the Centralized Reporting System user guide, the Centralized Reporting System video series. Loved the video series because it helps you be able to use it for looking at summative assessments, interim assessments, and then also the interim assessment overview guide. So these images kind of show the key tools that we've used as part of our implementation plan. And the timeline that's represented on this slide, this shows the tested IABs across the year. Our timeline starts in the October-November timeline. Math is usually tested first in October. So you see the highlights for the tested math IAB, the 2 ELA IABs, another tested math, and another 2 ELA. So up in the corner, it shows you in grades 3 through 5, they have 4 tested in ELA, 4 guided, 4 integrated with instruction. For math, there's 2 that are tested, 1 that's guided, and it's the performance task, and then 7 integrated within instructional units and used as an end of unit assessment because it's covering the same skill as our math curriculum, and we just kind of interchange that with the IAB. And the Centralized Reporting System icon is kind of located right there because anything that is a tested IAB, we utilize the Centralized Reporting System to be able to see output, to see where students are struggling, where students are excelling, and also to go back to the test reason. That is so important to be able to align that or to fix it after because you can edit them after. But that allows us to look at, schools can look at individual classrooms. I can look at the entire district. For one IAB, I can see the trends across, and we can kind of overlap that with our summative test analysis and be able to see strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. So that kind of lays the landscape of our year. And by April, there's additional guided pieces, but that we're pretty much done at that point. And then we're ready for NGSS and Smarter Balance. So this is something that students interact with, and it's integrated within their instruction and assessment system. And another huge plug for these assessments is if they are a student who receives EL support services or special education support services, their IABs have their accommodations in there, and that they are able to practice and rehearse with that all year long. And we can make some really informed choices about accommodations and designated supports across the year for students. Go to the next one. So our resources for assessment and analysis as a district, we've used our district assessment system and expanded it to really regularly include IABs and FIABs. This journey has been a few years for us, but I feel like it really became refined and very defined post-COVID. The document that you saw as a screenshot earlier, we revamp that every year. We have certain IABs that we use as tested ones every year. In ELA, there's 2 that remain, and then 2 that we kind of are leaving as that we can interchange them as we analyze our summative data to see what is needed, work with our teachers and teams to see what they need. But the testing scenarios provide the ability for us to look at progress, needs, and trends through centralized reporting. And this has been a great tool for our teachers and teams. And what we learned too through this process of using the IABs and using centralized reporting tools is our teachers have learned so much about standards-based assessment, what aligns, what doesn't, how to use the tools for teachers platform to kind of close the circle with this whole process. So we have seen a lot of gains for our students, and it has really enhanced our programming. So part of the centralized report, the piece with this is to really look at what tools exist for IABs and FIABs, as well as how centralized reporting enhances your use of them. So a couple of the screenshots here, they just kind of show my view when I log in and I'm looking at one of the IABs. I can see all our elementary schools. When you go in even closer, you're able to see a student's score report. You can also see the 5 items which the student performed the best, the 5 items which students performed the worst. That has been so informative for our teachers, so very helpful. They can click in and really see that sometimes maybe it's the language or the phrasing of the question. They can talk about what really either stumped the student or what gave the student a lot of confidence with their answer. And then the final screen grab that's at the bottom of the screen, this is an example of our grade 5 IAB data for ELA from last year to this year. So the December IAB from 2022 to 2023, you see some reduction in red, some increase in green, which is what we want to see. And I grabbed the grade 5 one. This is kind of a connection to Thompson because they had the read literary text. They kind of targeted that one as well, as did we, from disaggregating our summative data and looking at what students were doing with inferencing, how they were able or not able to respond to text. And one of the read literary pieces that we noticed that we had a nice comfortable jump this year compared to last March. And then when we look at our, because of course we're in centralized reporting daily now, looking at our rolling scores, and our grade 5 ELA data is the highest it's been ever. So it really has made a difference for our teachers, for our students, and what they're able to see and look at from a standards-based lens. So tracking this data through all the tools within centralized reporting has been very, very helpful. And then this system for us it feels rather comfortable because we've been using it, refining it. Students are very comfortable with it. One of the perks is as we slide into the summative window, nothing is unfamiliar. Students understand how to use the tools. They understand how to use all the bells and whistles that exist within the platform. You watch them with their highlighting, with their magnifying. They're just very, very comfortable with how to access these pieces because they're accessing it instructionally, they're accessing it in a guided manner, and they're accessing it in a tested way, but not in a way that feels like all we do is test students. We use it as a curriculum-based assessment. We can use it as a progress check, but it has really transformed how we are able to analyze student progress and data.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
Wow.
Ellen. I don't know, are there any questions for Ellen before we wrap things up with some resources and so forth?
Abe, while people are thinking about their questions, I just wanna, there's so many themes that across everybody, this is just so incredibly helpful. The, the all 4 groups talk about, consistency and that idea of collectively doing this. It's not as helpful district-wide if you're doing it sporadically in little groups. This teacher uses it and that one doesn't. Everybody talked about this idea of using this across a grade or school, and that there's PD behind it, so you're not just expecting the teachers to step into this. There's PD on how to use it, to introduce it, to train them, to administer it, and then building in time and having an opportunity for everybody to look at the results. I think those three went across all four of the groups. And I heard Ellen and Patty and Laura really talk about this idea of using that familiarity, whether it's the language or the tools. I will tell you that we see an incredible amount of our errors when we have appeals are really around either supports or accommodation errors, that if students have been using the interims across the year and teachers have been using the interims across the year, there wouldn't be so many issues where, oh, I didn't realize that student had, needed the test in Spanish or that type of thing. So you wouldn't be seeing those issues if the students were regularly using their supports or accommodations throughout the year. I feel like everybody, I loved Patty made a comment about, it's not only about the kids feeling comfortable, but even when they're seeing the progress, that even the teachers feel like they can see the accomplishment. I think that's a really telling statement with that. And, Brian also brought up the PD issue, again, having training around that and using multiple data points. It's not the end all and be all. They're little teeny short snapshots in time. So, but that, again, that idea of consistency, when you're going to use it or which one you're going to use it, really building it into the curriculum. It feels like everybody's got that the same thing. So, and again, I think you saw with the three of the four groups are relatively new to this. And so the idea that it takes time building, you're not going to hit, Ellen's plan all the way on the first time. I mean, they've been building this for like a decade. They were the first group that jumped on and really started to integrate the interims. They were talking about this in like 2012, 2013. So it takes time, little bits, and building it in as you go. Less is more, I think, with these. So I don't know. Do we have questions that anybody want it? You can raise your hand. You can unmute. I'm going to put if you mess around you need to know you'd have to be in TIED, test planning and management. And so you'd have to know your test session or the date of your assessment. But if you are, I'm just going to cut and paste the little thing into the chat and see if this works. If you are using to change if you're using on the dashboard, there are features and tools. Manage test reasons on the right-hand side will allow you to go in and change the test reason afterward, but you have to do a few steps. It's not like, hey, I'm going to click on it and change it. You have to either know the exact date or you have to know the session, the test session ID, which you can get from your plan and manage testing on TIED. So if folks have questions with that, you're welcome to email me. But it just is a little bit of finagling in the system, and that's right on the main dashboard page when you log in to the centralized reporting system. That on the right-hand side, features and tools, manage test reasons will allow you to change that.
All right.
Well, you want me
Chris,
to do the resources, or go ahead?
Oh, no, I was just gonna, Christy, thanks for wrapping us up, Christy. I think you synthesized everything there. Awesome. I was just gonna suggest we're almost at time. And we don't want to go over. I know if you look at our slide deck that's linked in the chat, you can see some of the resources for the interim accessibility resources and also tools for teachers. Take a look at those, and I guess we'll take any final questions either for my colleagues or our district presenters. And then if we don't have any, we'll call it a webinar. So I'll give it one more shot here if anybody has any questions.
And as always, we have our contact information. So if you don't have a question today, but you're planning over the summer, you'd like to think of ways to integrate, send us an email. We're always here. They don't let us leave. So we're here all summer. But you're welcome when life slows down a little to look at some of the resources and let us know how we can help you.
Okay, thanks, Christy. Again, thanks all our districts for coming out, and thank you all for coming. Have a good afternoon and have a good rest of the school year.
Thank you to everyone. You guys were wonderful.
Thank you all. Have a great day.